I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are reading a really straightforward narrative.
Okay.
Like, a man walks into a room, he sees something he probably shouldn't have seen, and he steps outside to tell his brothers about it.
Right.
And then the story concludes with the man's grandson being sentenced to eternal slavery.
Which, creates a completely baffling sequence of events.
It makes absolutely zero logical sense. I mean, the alleged crime doesn't match the severity of the reaction at all.
Yeah, totally.
And the punishment falls on a character who wasn't even in the room. But, well, what if the story only seems illogical because you are reading a text written in a heavy, ancient code?
Exactly. Without the cipher, you are completely missing the reality of what's happening just beneath the surface.
Right. So welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is basically to act as textual detectives.
I love that.
Yeah, we're examining a fascinating exegetical thesis by Frank Leo titled Ham's Violation of His Mother. And we are going to use ancient legal dictionaries to crack the code of, well, one of the most perplexing and widely misunderstood passages in the entire book of Genesis.
The story of Noah's drunkenness.
Yeah.
It is a narrative that has puzzled readers and scholars for millennia. But to truly grasp the complexity of Frank Leo's thesis, we have to start by laying out the surface-level narrative.
Right, we have to see what's actually on the page.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We need to look at exactly what the text says before we can understand what the text means.
Okay, let's do it. So, we are looking at Genesis chapter 9, verses 22 through 25.
Mm-hmm.
The flood is over, the ark has landed, Noah plants a vineyard, makes some wine, gets incredibly drunk, and basically passes out naked in his tent.
Which, so far is a pretty straightforward, highly human story.
Yeah, very human. But then his youngest son, Ham, walks in, and the English translation of the text literally says, Ham sees his father's nakedness.
Right.
Ham then goes outside and tells his two brothers, Shem and Japheth.
And their reaction is immediate and severe. They take a garment, walk into the tent backward, and cover Noah so they don't have to look at him.
Right. Then Noah wakes up from his drunken stupor. And here is where the plot holes get massive.
They really do.
Because the text says Noah wakes up and knows what his youngest son did to him. But, I mean, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Based on the previous sentences, Ham just saw him. Why does Noah wake up instinctively knowing a physical action was done to him?
And that is the first major red flag in the structure of the text.
Right.
There is a glaring disconnect between the verb used to describe the crime and the verb used to describe the aftermath.
And it gets so much weirder, honestly. Noah is furious. Mm-hmm. But instead of turning to Ham, the son who actually committed the supposed crime of looking at him in the tent, Noah issues a devastating generational curse on Ham's son, Canaan.
Noah's own grandson.
Exactly, his grandson. It defies the most basic concepts of cause and effect. It is like, I don't know, it's like someone stealing a car and a judge responding by sentencing the thief's unborn grandchild to life in prison.
That's a great way to put it.
The mechanics of the justice just don't align with the mechanics of the crime.
Which raises an important question. Are we simply misreading the text? Have we spent centuries applying modern literal sensibilities to ancient, highly specific legal terminology?
So if we are misreading it, where do we find the first clue to correct that reading?
Well, our first clue actually doesn't come from the original Hebrew. It comes from the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. When the Greek translators in the 3rd century BCE encountered this passage, they didn't just translate the words one for one. They were translating the underlying cultural meaning of those words.
So they were interpreting as they went.
Exactly. For the phrase father's nakedness, they used the word gymnosin, which carries the heavy weight of a deliberate uncovering or an exposure, not just a casual glance. But the real smoking gun is how they translated Noah's realization upon waking up.
What does the Greek say there?
It roughly translates to, he knew all that had been done to him. The Greek translators, who are, much closer to the original cultural context than we are, explicitly understood that this narrative implies a physical action.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Sure.
Because what is that Greek phrase actually signaling to us?
It signals that an event occurred well beyond mere observation. Something violent and definitive happened to Noah. But to figure out exactly what that action was, We cannot look at a modern dictionary.
Right, our definitions won't work.
Exactly. We have to look at how the ancient Israelites legally defined their own terminology.
Which means we have to move from the narrative of Genesis into the legal code of Leviticus.
Precisely.
Like if Genesis is the executive action of the text, Leviticus is the legislative branch. It sets the parameters for how these phrases operate in a court of ancient law.
That's a perfect analogy.
Mm-hmm.
We have to look at Leviticus chapter 18, verses 7 and 8. These texts function essentially as a glossary for ancient Israelite jurisprudence.
Okay, and what do they say?
They explicitly define the phrase, your father's nakedness. Verse 7 says, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother.
Wow, okay.
And verse 8 is even more direct. It says, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness.
That is a direct equivalency equation right there.
It really is.
The text legally defines the phrase, the father's nakedness, as being the exact same thing as the mother's nakedness or the father's wife.
Yes. And to understand this, we really have to understand the patriarchal structure of the ancient Near East.
Right.
The wife is considered the exclusive domain, the nakedness or the profound intimacy of the husband. To violate the wife is a direct usurpation of the father.
It is to literally uncover the father's nakedness.
Exactly. And then Leviticus 20, verse 17, gives us the other half of the cipher. It addresses the phrase seeing nakedness. In Hebrew, that's ra'erva. It describes a scenario where a man takes his sister and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness.
Right.
The text calls this a shameful thing and demands they be cut off from their people.
And clearly, a legal code isn't demanding exile just because two siblings made eye contact in a changing room.
No, absolutely not. In this strict legal context, the phrase seeing nakedness is not about vision at all. It is a universally understood legal euphemism for sexual intercourse.
Okay, let's unpack this for the listener. Because think about how you'd explain the modern English phrase, sleeping with someone to an outsider.
Oh yeah, that's a great example.
Right. If an extraterrestrial came down to Earth, picked up a tabloid magazine, and read that a famous actor slept with their co-star, the alien would literally think the two humans just took a nap together in the same room.
Right. They would entirely miss the scandal.
Exactly. The alien needs a cultural dictionary to understand that sleeping with is a polite, widely accepted euphemism for a sexual act. It's a softer phrase, masking a heavy reality.
That is the perfect framework for this. The author of Genesis is using the polite legal euphemism of their era to describe an event too horrific to detail graphically.
So when Genesis 9 says Ham saw his father's nakedness, it does not mean Ham accidentally walked in on his dad changing his clothes.
No.
Using the Torah's own internal dictionary, it means Ham engaged in a sexual act with his father's wife, his own mother.
It completely reframes the entire narrative architecture of the story.
It really does.
What we casually read as a story of accidental voyeurism and an old man's overreaction is actually a dark story of violent, incestuous usurpation.
Which completely changes the tone of the book. But, it makes me wonder, did the ancient readers actually understand the text this way?
This raises an important question.
Like, it's one thing for modern scholars like Frank Leo to connect legal definitions across different books of the Bible, but did the people who lived and breathed these texts thousands of years ago see it this way?
That is the crucial test of any textual theory. We have to look at the historical precedent. And to find out how ancient readers processed this, we look at the ancient scholars, the sages who debated these texts in the early academies.
Okay.
When we look at the Babylonian Talmud, specifically Tractate Sanhedrin 70a, we see that the ancient readers absolutely knew this story wasn't about mere voyeurism.
So they already possessed that cultural dictionary we were just talking about.
Exactly. The Talmud is essentially a massive, codified record of centuries of rabbinic legal debate.
Wow.
And in this tractate, two prominent sages, Rav and Shmuel, are recorded debating the exact nature of Ham's crime. And neither of them believed it was just looking.
What did they think it was?
They debated two shocking theories. One argued that Ham castrated Noah. The other argued that Ham sexually assaulted him.
Wow. So the debate in the ancient world wasn't if a horrific physical crime occurred, but rather which horrific physical crime occurred.
Precisely. And the sage arguing for sexual assault utilized a fascinating, rigorous linguistic tool called Gezerah Shava.
Okay, what is that?
This is a strict hermeneutic rule. It states that if a specific unusual word is used in two different contexts, those two contexts must inform and interpret each other.
Oh, okay.
The sage looked at the word he saw, in Hebrew, ve'er. used in Genesis 9 when Ham saw Noah's nakedness. He then pointed to Genesis 34, the story where a man named Shechem assaults Jacob's daughter, Dinah.
Right.
In Genesis 34, it says, Shechem saw, Vayar, Dinah, and the very next words describe a physical sexual assault.
So the ancient scholars are basically establishing a precedent.
Yes.
They are saying, if you want to know what this specific verb implies in chapter 9, look at how the exact same author uses it in chapter 34, where it unambiguously results in a physical violation.
Yes. The Talmud solidifies the interpretation that a physical sexual assault occurred.
Got it.
Now, there is a slight divergence here between the Talmudic debate and Frank Leo's thesis. The ancient Talmudic sages debate whether the assault was against Noah himself, focusing on castration or sodomy.
Right.
But Leo's thesis, relying strictly on the Levitical definitions we just explored, argues the assault was against Noah's wife.
Because the Levitical code is extremely specific about father's nakedness equating to the father's wife.
Isaac.
But, I mean, regardless of which interpretation you follow, we're dealing with a severe physical crime committed while Noah is incapacitated.
Sure.
Which brings up a massive logistical problem for me as a reader trying to follow the mechanics of this story.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, if Noah is blackout drunk, like literally unconscious in his tent, and Ham commits this horrific assault against Noah's wife, how on earth did Noah wake up and know what happened?
Right.
The text says Noah woke up from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him. If he was unconscious, who told him?
This is a great question.
Ham certainly isn't going to leave a confession. And if a horrific violation of the mother occurred, the profound trauma, coupled with the cultural dynamics of that era, would likely guarantee her silence. It just feels like a massive piece of the narrative machinery is missing here.
What's fascinating here is that ancient Jewish commentators noticed the exact same plot hole.
Really?
Yes. They knew the surface narrative was lacking a mechanical explanation. And to understand how they filled that gap, we turn to the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan.
The Targums being the ancient Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Bible used in the synagogues, right?
Yes, exactly. But they weren't just direct word-for-word translations. When the Hebrew was read aloud, the Aramaic Targum was spoken to explain the meaning to the common people.
Okay.
And in doing so, it often wove commentary, oral traditions, and vital narrative explanations right into the text itself. It acted as an interpretive guide.
That makes sense.
And the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan adds a crucial explicit detail to Genesis 9:24. It translates the verse like this: Noah awoke from his wine and knew by the recounting of a dream what Ham, his son, had done to him.
A dream. Wow, so we were talking about divine revelation.
Yes, God essentially communicated to the unconscious Noah exactly what had happened while he was passed out.
Oh.
Noah didn't need a human witness. He didn't need a confession. He received a divine briefing of the crime from the ultimate judge.
That perfectly resolves the mechanical issue of how Noah found out.
It really does.
And it elevates the story from a chaotic domestic dispute into a matter of divine justice. Which means, well, now that we understand the true horrific nature of the crime, that Ham usurped his father by assaulting his mother, and we understand how Noah received knowledge of it, we finally have the necessary context to explain the most confusing part of the entire story.
You're cursed.
Exactly. The curse on the grandson. So what does this all mean? Let's go back to Genesis 9:25. Noah wakes up. He has this divine dream revealing the ultimate betrayal, and he speaks. He says, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers."
We really need to look closely at the phrasing of that sentence. Canaan is cursed to be a slave to his brothers.
Right.
Now, if you map out the family tree based on a traditional surface-level reading, Canaan is Noah's grandson. He is Ham's son. Noah's other sons are Shem and Japheth.
Right, which means Shem and Japheth are Canaan's uncles. They are not his brothers.
Exactly. The Hebrew word used in the text is Elav, brothers. It does not use Dodim, which means uncles.
Okay.
If the text meant that Canaan would serve Shem and Japheth, it would legally state that he will serve his uncles. The deliberate use of the word brothers implies that the curse is operating strictly within Ham's immediate localized family unit.
Right, because Canaan's actual brothers were Cush, Mizraim, and Putz.
Yes.
So why is Canaan the specific target of this curse? Like, why not one of the other brothers?
This brings us to a fundamental concept in ancient biblical justice. Midah keneged midah.
Measure for measure, like an eye for an eye.
Exactly. In the ancient world, justice required strict equilibrium. The punishment must perfectly mirror the crime to balance the cosmic scales.
Okay.
The Targum's Pseudo-Jonathan notes that Ham's action, this ultimate violation of the marriage bed, prevented Noah from having a fourth son.
Because Ham fundamentally destroyed the generative union. The trust is gone, the sanctity of the marriage is shattered. By violating the mother, Ham essentially ends Noah's future lineage.
And because Ham destroyed Noah's ability to have a fourth son, the philosophy of measure for measure requires a balancing of the scales.
Oh, wow.
The punishment falls directly upon Ham's own fourth son.
Which is Canaan. That is an incredibly dark reality.
It is.
But structurally, it is a terrifyingly precise legal sentence. Ham steals Noah's future lineage, so Noah curses Ham's future lineage. The punishment isn't random anger from a hungover patriarch, it's proportional justice.
It transforms Noah's reaction entirely. He's no longer an old man lashing out blindly. He's acting as a judge, executing a strict sentence based on divine revelation and ancient legal symmetry.
The mathematical precision of it is undeniable once you have the right dictionary.
Absolutely.
But, to really solidify this theory, we should look for a precedent. If this legal framework is accurate, we should expect to see this exact combination of crime and punishment, usurping the father's bed and receiving a curse somewhere else in the Torah.
And finding a direct parallel would move this from a strong exegetical theory to a virtually undeniable textual reality.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting, because there is a parallel, and it involves another incredibly famous biblical family.
Okay.
If we look at the story of Reuben and Bilhah in Genesis 35:22.
It is a classic and tragic narrative. Reuben is the firstborn son of the patriarch Jacob.
Yeah.
And the text tells us that Reuben goes and sleeps with Bilhah, who is his father Jacob's concubine.
It's the exact same crime.
Yes.
It's the son violating the father's domain by sleeping with the father's wife or concubine. And this wasn't just lust, in the ancient world. This was a political coup.
Exactly.
Reuben is attempting to prematurely usurp Jacob's position as the head of the tribe. And what is the result for Reuben? He is cursed by Jacob on his deathbed, and he is entirely stripped of his birthright.
Right.
The eldest son loses his future because of this specific sexual violation.
And the linguistic connections between Reuben's story and Ham's story are stunning, especially when we view them through the legal lens of the book of Deuteronomy.
How so?
Well, in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 1 and chapter 27, verse 20, the legal code introduces a new metaphor for this exact crime. It calls it uncovering the father's skirt, or uncovering the father's edge.
Which means taking the father's wife. The wife is viewed metaphorically as the covering of the husband, so to uncover the skirt is to violate that union.
Exactly. Now, listen to the exact phrasing of Deuteronomy 27:20. Cursed be anyone who lies with his father's wife, because he has uncovered his father's skirt.
Wait, if Deuteronomy explicitly states that someone who commits this exact act is cursed, I'm assuming it's not a coincidence that Noah uses the word cursed against Canaan. Do they share the same root in the Hebrew?
They share the exact same word.
Really?
Yes. The word in Deuteronomy is arur, and the word Noah uses when he wakes up is arur Canaan. Cursed be Canaan.
Wow. The linguistic parallel seals the case completely.
It does.
You have the exact same crime. A son lying with the father's wife to usurp his authority. You have the exact same punishment, which is the stripping of status and a generational curse. And you have the exact same legal terminology, arur, being applied in both the narrative of Genesis and the legislative code of Deuteronomy.
It leaves very little room for doubt. When you synthesize Leviticus, Deuteronomy, the Talmud, and the Targums, the text is practically screaming its true meaning to anyone who knows how to read its specific vernacular.
It changes everything about how we read this book. I mean, let's look at the transformation of this text.
Yeah, let's recap it.
We started with a story that felt absurd and broken. A man gets drunk, his son accidentally sees him naked, and as a result, the grandson is cursed to be a slave. It felt petty. It lacked cause and effect.
But by reading carefully and by utilizing the text's own internal dictionary, specifically the Levitical definitions of nakedness and seeing, that absurd story transforms.
It transforms into a cohesive, logically sound, albeit terrifying account. Ham didn't just look. He committed a violent, calculated familial assault against his own mother while his father was incapacitated.
Right.
God reveals this hidden crime to Noah through a dream, and Noah, acting as a tribal judge, applies the ancient law of measure for measure. Ham destroyed Noah's fourth son, so Ham's fourth son, Canaan, bears the resulting curse.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, This deep dive is about so much more than just clarifying a single biblical passage. It is a vital exercise in critical reading and historical comprehension.
It really highlights the danger of taking ancient texts at face value. When we assume that our modern English definitions apply perfectly to ancient Hebrew euphemisms, we don't just misunderstand the story, we invent a completely new, often nonsensical story.
We really do.
To truly understand history, literature, or ancient law, we have to do the hard work of learning the cultural and legal vernacular of the time.
Exactly. Without the translation layer provided by Frank Leo's thesis, we are blind to the reality of the text. Today, we finally saw what was actually happening in the tent.
Which leaves me with a final, slightly unsettling thought for you to ponder as you go about your day.
Oh, boy.
We just spent this time proving that a foundational text like Genesis uses polite, everyday language, a simple word like seeing as a protective euphemism to mask one of its darkest, most earth-shattering crimes.
Right.
It makes you wonder, what other simple, tame stories from ancient history, mythology, or literature are you familiar with? And what explosive, terrifying secrets might be hiding just below the surface of those stories, patiently waiting for someone to finally decode them?